In this chapter, we'll take a look at cognitive development as it occurs in late adulthood. One of the first things we'll take a look at is the formation of new brain cells. Neurons form and dendrites grow in adulthood, and particularly in the hippocampus. And if you remember from previous discussions, the hippocampus is what's a structure in the brain that's really responsible for encoding new memories. So actually, memory can continue to improve throughout lifehood. And new neurons provide cognitive adaptability and in order to succeed in the context of challenging and changing environments. And so they mention here, growth of the brain is slow, it's limited and not sufficient to restore itself to its younger state. So that is common with the aging brain. Now, we're going to take a look at senescence in the brain, so slower thinking. That's actually attributed to overall slowdown in reaction time, movement, speech, and thought during late adulthood. So that's usually caused because neurotransmitter production is reduced and neural fluid decreases, myelination thins, and cerebral blood circulates more slowly. And overall, the total volume of the brain becomes smaller. So please feel free to pause the video and take a look at this to gain further insight. And I just put some notes in here for you to look at. As well, stop the video and read these to gain further insight, and then we'll move on. So the variations in brain efficiency that occur in the various persons who are in late adulthood, those differences are due in part to past health and habits. And one thing they mention here is high socioeconomic status correlates highly with less cognitive decline. So definitely high SES people, they begin late adulthood with higher IQs, so their losses are not as noticeable. And there's a couple things too, about the how actually more education can help slow down the effects of the aging brain. So please take a look at these. And moving on. So they mention a couple things, definitely in the aging brain, multitasking has been found to be a little more effective and less effective than you might believe. So multitasking becomes less common as you age. And they remind us that the brain is always multitasking, but neurons are not multitaskers, and task switching has a switch cost. So what they mean by that, is older adults may be better at multitasking than younger adults. So they ask the question, do you agree with that? If so, why? And if not, why not? This might be a great thing to discuss in our discussion forum. We're going to take a look at information processing after age 65. So specifically input. And important thing to keep in mind here is sensory loss. It can be kind of undetected as the brain ages because the brain actually fills in missed sights and sounds automatically. For those of you who have studied this in other psychology classes, this will sound familiar. More notes that I included here for you, so stop the video and read these and become familiar with these. Now, when it comes to memory, so memory loss can be a normal occurrence as one ages. And so I'm going to move on here. And so prospective memory, that includes the ability to quickly shift mentally among tasks. And also that refers to remembering to perform a future task. So if one says, oh, I need to remember to, um, pay my phone bill today, or something like that. Usually, that kind of memory process that actually tends to fade a little bit with age. And but it can be aided through routines, and especially using things like memory cues, like keeping notes, like writing reminder notes, or things that will remind one to perform the task that they intend to perform that day. Now, working memory, that's working memory refers to the type of memory that as one is engaged in thinking about something, or one is engaged in conversation or something, usually lasts for about 20 seconds or so. And that is the ability to keep processing and keep in the forefront of one's consciousness, what one is listening to, reading, or discussing with another. So one thing that's important that they mention here is when older people can take their time and concentrate, memory tends to not fade. So definitely something to keep in mind. Now, I added more notes right here. And so please pause the video and read each of these and become familiar with these. The increased insight, I think you will find very interesting and insightful. So we're going to look at what's called control processes, and those are involved in the underlying impairment of cognition in a late adulthood, especially impaired retrieval. So retrieval, just to remind you, retrieval refers to the process. We tend to actually just use the term remembering, but in psychology, the actual process is referred to as retrieval. So we're going to begin to talk about output now for information processing. So in late adulthood, there's a gradual decline in output of the primary mental abilities, such as verbal meaning, spatial orientation, inductive reasoning, number of ability, and word fluency. Those are actually, it's normal to experience a little bit of a decline of that as one ages. So two important things that can actually help slow down that process they mention here are one's overall health and one's overall training. Now we're going to take a look at neurocognitive disorders. They're also just called NCDs for short. And this is just some statistics right here. So stop the video, take a look at these statistics just to get a broad overview. And here are some most common neurocognitive diseases, such as Alzheimer's, vascular disease, frontotemporal NCDs, and other disorders. So Alzheimer's disease, that is severe and worsening memory loss is the main system, and they usually begin much later and in age. And so genetics do have a somewhat of an impact on that. Okay, so here's some scans right here. So this brain right here on the left-hand side, this is actually someone who is experiencing Alzheimer's disease, whereas a quote-unquote normal functioning brain on the right here, as you can see, the one on the left, the one who is suffering from Alzheimer's disease, is much smaller And so it's very shrunken, and there's much more reduced neural activity. Some more looks at some brains as it and the actual stages as Alzheimer's progresses. I'm going to move on. I don't expect you to memorize this, but I did leave it in here just for interest for you. Okay, so frontotemporal neurocognitive disease. So that is deterioration of the frontal lobes and the amygdala. So if you remember from previous discussions, frontal lobes are extremely important and for executive functions such as thinking logically, planning, self-control, control of one's emotions and thoughts and that kind of thing. So I'm trying to put this in very simple terms to make this easier to remember. And then this structure right here, you remember the amygdala is associated with encoding new memories. So memory and then executive function, that is what are impaired by frontotemporal NCD type disease. Now here's some looks right here at Parkinson's disease and Lewy body disease. So please pause the video, take a look at these. And here's some common causes for neurocognitive disease. Things like Huntington's disease, multiple sclerosis, severe head injuries, last stages of syphilis, AIDS, and what is known as mad cow disease. So those are common causes of neurocognitive disease. Now, this just refers as a reminder, actually, that severe brain damage cannot be reversed, but the rate of the decline and some symptoms can be treated when one experiences these. And so if you feel like you would like more insight into this, please pause and take a look. Same with this slide. Please pause, take a look at these. There's nothing to really memorize in here. It's just something to make you more familiar with definitely ways to reverse impairment of these diseases we mentioned earlier. So with age, bodies become less efficient at digesting food and using its nutrients. And also that is true with many other things as well. But we're going to take a look at this term called polypharmacy. And that's when the elderly, they're prescribed several drugs, and the side effects can actually cause symptoms that resemble neurocognitive disease. So right here, this just refers to Erickson and Maslow, and you'll remember these names from previous discussions. But you remember Erickson, he had various stages that we experience as we progress through the lifespan. And Erickson's final stage, he reminds us that integrity versus despair. So that actually affects older persons, which they gain interest in the arts, in children, and in human experience as a whole. And also in the self-actualization phase of this too, that the final stage in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is characterized by aesthetic, creative, philosophical, and spiritual understanding. So Just elaborating just a little bit more, that elderly artists with extraordinary talents actually did not feel that their aging actually resulted in decline in their abilities. A couple terms here: life review. That's just an examination of one's own role in the history of human life, engaged in by many elderly people. And so, and this is just a generalization, but the results of life review are generally positive. And wisdom, that refers to expert knowledge system, and it deals with the conduct and understanding of life. So that concludes our discussion for this chapter. Please complete your study guides and participate in the accompanying discussion forum.